A gute Woche.
Tzavo'oh. Tzavo'oh, and welcome to tonight's shiur. Tonight is Motzei Shabbos Parshas Noach, and I'm going to start off with not a halacha, but a very nice word, which is attributed to someone known as Reb Shamshon of Ostropol. He was a gewaldiker Goen and Kodesh. Actually, he was killed al Kiddush Hashem, and this is in the Siddur, as you can see, a Sedra Avodo Meire Derech. So he talks about the simon for the days when we say full Hallel, which are 2 days of Pesach, first 2 days of Pesach, 2 days of Shavuos, 9 days of Sukkot, and 8 days of Hanukkah, and simon is bebetach. So he quotes here a Medrash Hanelon, where it says, Shnayim boel nechel atevo, ilein inun, these are the days, the mashlimin behoin hal hagodl. These are the times we say the full Hallel. It's interesting, hal hagodl, but never mind. But meanwhile, he says that various, the Malagala Mukas doesn't say anything, and he says very simple. He says, Shnayim, Bo El Noach, El Hatevo. Shnayim is 2 and 2. That's the 2 days of Pesach, 2 days of Shavuos. Bo is Gematria 9. That's the 9 days of Sukkot. El Noach is actually the same Gematria Mamash as Hanukkah. So you have a remez in this week's Sedra for the days of Hallel. I'm intrigued whether there's any deeper connection between the posuk of the animals coming to the table and the Hallel that I couldn't figure out. But meanwhile, it's very nice word. Kevin de Osseli is really talking to Drush. I have another little Drush which I saw. Someone, Rabbi Avram Katz, shared this on the Cholol Iyun Tefillah. We have the posuk, which is the central posuk for Ashrei, is the posuk Peseach es yodecho umasbia l'chol chayrotzen. Literally means Hashem you open your hands, and you satiate everyone willingly. It's a little bit odd that the posuk starts off in second person, Peseach es yodecho, talking to Hashem directly, and then umasbia l'chol chayrotzen, you're talking in third person. So he says a nice word, that the Yodecho, Hashem's hands, is Hashem's generosity, Hashem's providing. And we daven to Hashem that we should merit to be Hashem's hands in distributing and helping another person. Peseach es Yodecho, so you should give us the opportunity to live up to your expectation to be your hands. And we in turn must be l'chol chayrotz, and we should be willingly providing for all chayim, all living, we're providing them in a willing way, in an ample way. Okay, having gone through the divrei drush or remez, whichever you want to call it, let's go now to our shalos lahalocha. So one of our avid listeners asked me to clarify the story about reheating foods on Shabbos. Now, first of all, we don't put food directly. Even if there's no question of bishul, we won't put food directly on the stove because of nira kimavashal. But the question is about putting it, what I call double decker. Let's say people put a challah on top of the urn or on top of the pot of soup to defrost and then to warm it up. That's okay because the challah is fully baked, and reheating it is not a question of baking, but that's okay, and it's not nira kimavashal, it's not mavash. The question is about taking foods which have got, like a kugel, which has been made with a certain amount of oil, and reheating it. Is that an issue of mavashal? So when the oil which is in the kugel will become warm, become hot, yatziledes boy, is that called an issur of bishul? So let's look at this carefully. So this is from Siman Shin Yud Ches, where it says, Mechaber, says a food, tavshil, a food which has been cooked cold totally, yesh be mishum bishul im nitzdanen. Reheating a cooked food is called cooking. Then he goes further, even if it is semi-cooked, still shaykh by bishul, fine. Vahani mili, when do we say that bishul acha bishul applies? V'tavshil sheyesh by morok, a food which has got in it however you translate morok, some soup, some juice in it. But if it is dry, so then there's no problem of bishul acha bishul. So the famous idea, ein bishul acha bishul bedova yovesh, yes bishul acha bishul bedovor lach. So he says here, if there's liquid in the food, then yeah, there is a issue of bishul acha bishul. If there's no liquid, it's a dry food, then ein bishul acha bishul. Someone's pointing out, if the challah is frozen, don't put it direct whilst it's still got ice there. Don't put it directly on the heat yet, because of the ice becoming water and then reheating. But once the ice is no longer there, or there is no ice, then you can put it as I said before, on top of the urn or something like that. Now, this lashon, davar sheyesh by morok, this is the lashon of the Tur, of the Shulchan Aruch, and also in the Tur. Interesting how the Alter Rebbe quotes this, and he changes the wording. He doesn't use yesh by morok. He says dovo sheyesh dovo lach yesh by bishul. Anything which is a moist food, it has got a isur of bishul. Tavshil lach, you've got a moist food or wet food which has already been cooked and it cooled off. So he changes, instead of tavshil sheyesh by morok, he uses the words lach. Now that brings us to an interesting conclusion. It doesn't have to be fluid. It has to, as long as it's wet, then already you have the issue of bishul achar bishul. How do you define wet? You know what fluid is? Fluid is that it can go flow down from place to place. But wet, so we have generally the rule of toifach al manas lahatfiach in various areas of halacha. If it's so wet that if you put your finger on it, and then you put your finger on your hand, on the other hand, and you'll feel the wetness, that defines it as dovor lach. So therefore, if you have a food which is wet on the surface, and then you touch it and you move it, and if it's wet on the surface, reheating that comes into the issur of bishul on Shabbos. So again, it's fully cooked, but now it's wet on the surface. To reheat it would be issur of bishul. What about, though, a kugel which is dry on the outside, but we know that inside there's moisture? Is reheating that considered a problem of bishul or not? Yeah. So again, if it's wet on the surface, then yes, that's a issur of bishul. If it's dry on the surface, typically a kugel is nice and crispy on the outside. Inside there is oil, moisture, or reheated. Now, looking at the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, where he has those 4 paragraphs called Hilchos Rabsa L'Shabbat. Though there's no issue of reheating, of cooking with a dry food. But here he comes with a question, what about something which starts off as a solid and then becomes a liquid? So typically, let's say something like margarine, or butter. Can you put butter on margarine on a hot potato? At the moment, it's a solid, but it will melt and it'll become a liquid. So do you look at it as a liquid or as a solid? So the Alter Rebbe takes the view here in the Siddur, not like the Shulchan Aruch, that if it's going to become a liquid, then it's going to be dealt with as a liquid. That he says that belachluch is hamochui, that moisture which is dissolved, if it becomes yatzer ledas boy. And therefore he says, if you have meat or chicken which has been roasted or cooked, and it has, let's say, some fats clinging to it, and then you're going to heat it up, and that fat which is clinging is going to become a liquid, and that liquid become hot enough, Yatsil letters by. Then that is a Isur skill of a chorus chas v'sholem. It's like cooking on Shabbos. So you read the words of the Alter Rebbe, Hanimche mehem, that the liquid which is dissolving from them. That science kind of tells me that the liquid inside the food is not the problem. It's only when it has come out. So coming back to our kugel, it's got oil in it, admittedly, and that oil will become Yatzeledesboi if it's sitting in a hot place, and that's still not a problem unless it was actually the liquid is out. Now, just to take this a little bit to more extreme, you might have a kugel inside a baking tin, and because it's in a baking tin, therefore the liquid is staying inside. If you tear away the baking tin or the greaseproof paper, and it would ooze out, but it hasn't. So therefore, that's still not called cooking. It's only it's only considered cooking when it's a liquid which is exposed. Now you're going to ask, what's the scientific explanation for this? What's the svara? The same liquid is on the surface is bishul. The liquid which is inside. All right. So this you can see here from Rab Forkash in Shabbos Halocho. See, he has a long discussion about this question. Let's say yes, the oil in the kugel will become Yatzeledesboi. But if it became Yatzeledesboi as a solid, and then it comes out into a liquid, that's okay, because so long as it's still absorbed in the food, is ein boy bishul bishul. It's this chiddush, which actually is machlokas or rishonim, but even the rishonim who are machme yesh bishul bishul in liquids is only when it is visible to the atmosphere, but as long as it's still inside the food, it would remain ein boy bishul bishul. Okay, let's go on to the next point, and that is about a bishul akum question. So, someone living somewhere in the provinces asks me, can they buy partially cooked chips? In America call them French fries, and it's got the Sephardi Kashrus Authority hechsher, so the ingredients are okay. Question is, it's a Goyish factory. Is the fact that they are semi-cooked in the factory, does it make it a problem of bishul akum? So here you have this on the screen. Hilchot bishul akum is in Yeridea Kuf Yud Gimel, and the Mechaber says if a goy cooked kamachal ben derusoi, which is either third cooked or half cooked, and then a yid finished off. So the Mechaber says yesh lesser, that's not okay. So once the goy has cooked it to the degree of machal ben derusoi, so it's already cooked. It's already by my bishul akum. The fact that the yid finished off the cooking doesn't help. He says, unless it's Erev Shabbos Yom Tov, which has to be Beruba, in pressing circumstances, you can be Mekel. So that's the Mechaber. The Rebbe of Karo is more inclined to be Machmir. And here we see the Ramo, V'yesh Matirin B'chol Inyan, and there are those who don't worry about this, and they say the fact that although the Goy did bring it to a certain degree of maturity, of readiness, of edibility, but it wasn't finished, and the Yid finished it, that's good enough to call it Bishul Yisrael. So therefore, the answer to this question, someone who asked the question is Ashkenazi, that can follow the Ramo, and therefore it's mutter. I mentioned before it's under the Sephardi Kashrus Authority. So how does it work for Sephardim? So I didn't ask them, but I remember the Rav Padve, Zechen Levrach in Cheshev, has got a tshuva about canned vegetables, like corn, beetroot, potatoes. Is that an issue of bishul akum? But you buy this from factories, from Goyish factories. So Rav Padve, there's a well-known discussion in Hilchos bishul akum, smoked food is not subject to bishul akum. So someone to say it's therefore steamed food is also not called bishul akum. And the cooking in the factories works in a way of steaming, which others disagree with that because they say it's the steam cooks, it heats the liquid in the can, so it's cooking in water. It's just that the heat is communicated through a steam. But the Rav Papa brings in something very interesting. We know when it comes to bread, pas akum. So the when it comes to pas akum, we have a distinction between pas palter and pas pas balabais. That the main issue of goyish bread is from a private owner, but if it's a shopkeeper, a baker, a commercial, so then the chacham were less worried because the whole idea is about socializing and becoming friendly. The commercial baker doesn't become friendly with all his customers. And therefore, this is clear in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuf Yud Beis that there's a difference between pas palter, which you can be more makel when there's no pas Yisrael available at least, and pas nochri of a private person. In cooking, there's generally not, this distinction is not made between bishul palter and bishul balabayas. But there are Rishonim who do make such a distinction. So Rav Papa relies on that as another tziruf to allow vegetables cooked, buying canned vegetables. So if that's the case, then the same heter would apply for these chips. So therefore you ask the Sephardi Kashrus Authority giving a heter. It's certainly no worse than canned vegetables, which are possibly oilal shulchan menachem. I just want to say that about 40 years ago, someone asked the Rebbe, someone here in England asked the Rebbe for some family situation, and the Rebbe said they should check their kashrus. And so they contacted me at the time, and they gave me their whole shopping list, which products could be a question. And at the time, I saw that they're using canned vegetables from Goyish providers, and I advised them to not use them. They should use only Bishul Yisrael. I'm saying this, that canned vegetables, it certainly is more muhuder, to more machmir, to avoid using canned vegetables which are not Bishul Yisrael, but there is room to be makel where necessary. Okay, now we're going to go to something which it's still a work in progress, but I'm going to share it with you anyways. And that is, what do you do with an old talus or an old pair of tzitzis? Can you take the whole talus, wrap it in a bag, and put it in recycle? I don't know, does recycle take cloth? Or are they only fussy there and become very, is it only paper and glass? I don't know. But can you wrap it up and put it? There was also places where you can recycle clothing also. Are you allowed to? So someone suggesting give it to Chevra Kaddish. Actually, during COVID, they came asking for spare Taleisim. But yeah, so take a look here. Here you have a Loshen in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, which is, it's the same Loshen in Mechaber, in Siman Chof Aleph, and it's a Loshen of the Ran in Shabbos Perek Yud Zayin. Talisos shel mitzvah, which means the talis which we wear for davening. Shebolu, they've worn out. Bo'odom boideles atzmoi mehen, you're not using them. I really am still puzzled what this Loshen was trying to say. But you stop using them. And you can't use them as a towel, and certainly not for wiping yourself after, etc. You mustn't use them for a disgraceful purpose. So worn out talus, you're not using it. Don't use it as a shmata for washing the floor, etc. Elo zoikon, you may discard it. Vehin kolin me elehen, and somehow they disintegrate. I don't know how that works exactly, but that's what it says here in Shulchan Aruch. So I read this, talus. The talus is you're not. It's worn out. You're not using it anymore. So it says clearly, Zorkon ve'hen kolin me'alein. So now you have here the next quote you have is from a contemporary sefer called Genizah HaKodesh. It's all about Sheimos, and he says, yeah, Beged hatalus godle cotton, shehusru mehem tzitzis ubolu. If you remove the tzitzis and they're worn out, then you don't have to put them in Genizah. You can put them in the ashpo, but not in a disgraceful place. So now he's added something, that the tzitzis have been removed. So you read the simple pshat, the simple Shulchan Aruch, which, as I said, the same Lashon Mechaber. It doesn't talk about removing the tzitzis, but here they've added about having removed the tzitzis. This is also in the Piskei Teshuvos, and he writes, so long as the tzitzis are attached, you're not allowed to discard it into the ashpo, even if they're wrapped in a bag. And he just says, leave it in a place where it's going to disintegrate. Whatever. I don't know how that's going to happen. But I just see them lying around and they survive very, very well. Now, where do they get this from? So where the Mechaber had said not to use it for tashmish megune, for a disgraceful use. So here we have the Mishnah Berurah. Avol l'she'ein megune shori. You can use the talus, the old talus, which is no longer usable for wearing. You can use it for a respectful use, not a disgraceful use. Then he adds, if you're allowed to use the talus for tashmish she'ein megune. So the Oilas Talmud says you are allowed to, because only when you have with the tzitzis. Well, I'll come to that in a moment. The Mechaber is machmir, whereas the Taz says it's osur. Here's the question: can I use an old talus? Can I use it as a tablecloth? Can I use it as a curtain, etc.? And so that's not a tashmish megune; it's a respectful use of a piece of cloth. And so the way the Mishnah Berurah is representing it, that's only allowed if the tzitzis. According to Ola Talmud, it's allowed, but according to the Taz, it's also. And he's quoting here from, now let's take a look, El Yorabo. El Yorabo is a commentary on the Levush. And where it talks about you're not allowed to talk, which is the same halacha, you're not allowed to use the talus for tashmish megune, but you can use it if you've removed the tzitzis. Let's say you want to, like you're allowed to sell it to a goy, you're allowed to use, once you remove the tzitzis, you're allowed to use it for a tashmish she'ein megune, for a respectful use. And certainly you can cut it up and make it into another garment. But so long as the tzitzis are attached, even though you're not wearing it, for that matter, a shofar after Rosh Hashanah, a lulav after Sukkot, so the Bach says you're not allowed to use them for derech bizoyon. So I don't know what's happening here. He just said we're talking about tashmish she'ein megune, and now he says it's bizoyon. Okay, but Talus Gufe says, he says the Oilas Talmud says you're allowed to use the talus if it's not a disrespectful use, and he says, and he challenges it. So this is the El Yerabeh. So now we have here Machlokes of Achronim. Are you allowed to use a talus with the tzitzis on for a tashmish she'ein megune? Bear with me. I'm going to go back and read the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch carefully again. So this is, as you can see, kadas malasois, what she meant to do with tzitzis, threads which are snapped off. Now they're missing a vav here. Ube talisus yeshonim. Yeah. I know you might think I'm just making it up as I go along, but it's actually this is how in the Mechaber it says Uber Talisus Yeshonim, because it's dealing with both tzitzis which are snapped. Now let's read this carefully. Tzitzis, now let's explain. There's Tashmishe Kedusha and Tashmishe Mitzvah. Tashmishe Kedusha means an article which has got Hashem's name written in it, like a mezuzah, tefillin, and Sefer Torah, and then you can have the bias of the tefillin, the ritzus of the tefillin, the cover of the Sefer Torah, but that's Kedusha, where it's got Kedushas Hashem. Then we've got Tashmisha Mitzvah. Tashmisha Mitzvah means an esrog, a lulav, schach, an item used for mitzvah. So, since they don't have an intrinsic kedusha, they are used for mitzvah. Therefore, after the tzitzis have been separated from the talis, you're allowed to throw those tzitzis away into the ashpa. So, snapped threads of tzitzis may be discarded in the ashpa, first opinion. But then he adds that so long as they're still attached to the garment, you're not allowed to use them for a tashmish shel chayil, for a mundane use. So the tzitzis, while they're still attached to the talis, or talis kotel for that matter, they are sacred, and you're not allowed to use them to tie anything. So what would you use your tzitzis to tie? The only thing I can think of, my mischievous way, is to use your tzitzis to tickle a kid's ear, so you wouldn't be allowed to. Find something else. Okay, that's you're not allowed to use. So that again, tzitzis attached to the garment have got a kedusha of sorts. Once they're disconnected, you're allowed to discard them. Second opinion, even tzitzis which are snapped off, you shouldn't be throwing them in the ashpa or to mokim meguna, to a despicable place. But you can throw them in a mokim sheloi b'mokim megun. You can discard them in not a mokim megun. But you don't have to put them in Genizah because they don't have kedusha. So the first opinion says snap tzitzis can be thrown in the garbage. Second opinion says no, you're not allowed to. Even though they're no longer part of the beged, no longer usable as tzitzis, still you're not allowed to disgrace them. Then the Alter Rebbe says that Halocho is like the first opinion, but machmir should be tovei alav bracha. And then he goes to the third opinion, Bali Nefesh, who would use them, who would put them in Genizah, or to use them as a bookmark. Okay, so now we've got here snap tzitzis. We've got here three opinions. The Mechaber is the one who says snap tzitzis you're allowed to throw in the bin. And now we come in, then Mechaber says the same thing as the Alter Rebbe. What about a talis? So whilst the tzitzis which are snapped off, he holds you are allowed to throw them in the bin, but the talis, which has still got the tzitzis on, that's the way I'm learning. So he says, you're not allowed to use them in a disgraceful way. I don't see anything convincing that it means that the tzitzis have been removed. But let me take you a little bit further. Let's say you do want to remove the tzitzis, yeah? So I said, these are the other poskim are saying you can't put a talis in the bin unless the tzitzis have been removed. Are you allowed to just snap the tzitzis? I don't want to slap them into the bin, yeah? So now, are you allowed to snap tzitzis off a garment? So here we're going back to in Sirich Tzitzis is Siman Tesvav. It says here that you are not allowed to remove tzitzis from a garment if you don't want to use those tzitzis for another garment, like the idea of removing a mezuzah. Well, that's another discussion. But yeah, the Gemara in Shabbos, matir mebeged lebeged. But to take off tzitzis off a garment, and you're not going to use them, so you mavatal bechino, you are cancelling the mitzvah of tzitzis from this garment. But if you are going to if you you want to make it into another garment, you want to make it into a jacket or whatever, which won't have the mitzvah of tzitzis, so you won't be allowed to remove the tzitzis in order to make the wool into a jacket. Or if you want to sell it to a guy, so then you'd be allowed to sell and remove the tzitzis, because once it comes to the hands of a guy, there's no mitzvah. So then there. All right, so now you are allowed to remove the tzitzis from a garment which is no longer going to be in use. That's what it seems to be clear. But then snapping the tzitzis, says the Mishnah Berurah, is also Siman Tesvav. He uses the word lahatir tzitzis, to untie the tzitzis. Yesh min achronim, says the Mishnah Berurah. There are those achronim who say you should to remove tzitzis, you'd have to untie them, but not snap them, because you're spoiling that they're. So he says if they are, you shouldn't throw away something which might be useful. But then brings a Chai Odom. If it's a big tircha, then you're allowed to snap them. So really, what remains is snapping tzitzis off a garment would not be so glad. We do know he does say, what is it, the Chevra Kadisha, posel the talis by ripping off the tzitzis and putting in the urine. Yeah, so there's a way of removing the tzitzis without snapping the tzitzis, but by cutting the garment, by cutting the corner of the talis, cut into it. And I see someone saying that that's not what they do; they just snap them. Is that right? Can you unmute yourself and tell us?
No, we rub them against the oren.
And then what?
It cuts it.
So the
side of the oren is sharp at the top.
Ah, okay.
We just rub the tzitzis until it snaps.
Pardon the pun. We just got a live report. Okay. Good. So I mean, here he says you're allowed to. The Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to be matir for Tal Shemasim, but you're saying that from the Chevra Kadisha they actually indirectly snap them. Right. Okay. So as I say, the Achronim seem to be based upon the Mishnah, based upon the Pri Megadim, seem to be saying that you shouldn't discard a talus with the tzitzis still attached. My impression remains that the Alter Rebbe and Pashtus Loshen Mechaber is that it's not an issue. As the Alter Rebbe had Loshen Zorkom Bel Shloi B'Mokim Meguna. If it's wrapped up and put in recycling, I don't see that as a Mokim Meguna. There's a difference between using it, even if you're going to go back about using it as a curtain, using it as a tablecloth, but then there's just discarding it. If it's not in a disrespectful way, there's a mokim lahakil. I'm saying this especially nowadays with so much being printed. The Sheimos situation is in such overload, and the contemporary, Rabbonim, etc., are looking for ways to cut the workload of the Sheimos story. Okay, let's move on. Fairly simple question. A shliach somewhere, he's making Havdolo for his family, and then he wants to go out to find a bunch of youth, drengzach somewhere in the street, and he wants to bring them together and make Havdolo for them. Is there a problem to do Havdolo twice? So that's fairly clear. Here you have in Alter Rebbe Shechanoch, Simon Tzadik Vov, that the chazan who's made Havdolo in shul, and he was yoitze, and those who were yoitze from him, and they can still go home and make Havdolo for their family who weren't in shul. Here the Alter Rebbe adds haktanim, even for under bar mitzvah. That's provided that they are over the age of chinuch, so you could do Havdolo again for the children who are over the age of chinuch. But an adult who was in shul, an adult who wasn't in shul, if it's just for an adult who wasn't in shul, then there may be an issue of making Havdolo for them, because they should make Havdolo for themselves. That's interesting. That would be then a question of making Havdolo for family members who didn't come to shul, or women, etc. Lepoil, I've mentioned this before, in Tov Shin Chof Zayin, twice, on Rosh Hashanah and the Sukkot. Then it was still by the Rebbe the custom that when Yom Tov went into Shabbos, there would be a Farbrengen on Friday afternoon, and it went into Shabbos. And when it was Shkia, someone would, I'm not sure exactly the timing, but someone would make Kiddush for whoever wants to be Yotze, what's called Paris Mapa Mekadosh. This continued, and then eventually the Rebbe stopped this practice, but that was the time. And the Rebbe said by the Farbrengen they should announce that the people who are Yotze from Paris Mapa Mekadosh can still go home and make Kiddush for the Bnei Habayis. So, despite what it says here, that for someone who's capable of making their own Kiddush, or they can't own Havdolo, you don't have Arvis, you can't make Havdolo for them. There the Rebbe said they can go home and make Kiddush for their families. And I suspect in Crown Heights at the time, the people at the Farbrengen, many of their wives were capable of making Kiddush themselves. But they didn't like wine, I don't know, but it's a subshikal Kiddush. Possibly the Rebbe was relying on the opinion of the Pri Chodosh, which is also quoted by the Alter Rebbe in Kuntras Achron, the end of Siman in Siman Ayin Reish Beis, where he says, and Pri Chodesh says this, that you are allowed to do Havdolo or Kiddush again, even for someone is capable. So let's go through that carefully. There's a concept of arvus. I've got responsibility. How can I make a brocha for you when I've already been covered? So I've got an arvus. I've got a responsibility for you. And therefore, I can make Kiddush again for you. The shaila is, if you are able to pay your debt, because you're capable of making Kiddush yourself, can I make Kiddush for you? So that's what other poskim say you cannot, because he can cover himself, so then arvus doesn't kick in. Pichodosh says you can. Just to finish off this point of Havdolo, just to clarify, you can make the Havdolo again for the youth, but only if there are boys there. If it's just girls, then we do have a problem of making Havdolo just for a woman, because there's a svara that a woman isn't chayiv b'Havdolo, and therefore a man to make Havdolo for a woman is just for a woman. He's already been yotze. That would be a problem. Okay, let's go on. Someone asked me for some clarity. He asked me, where can you get some clarity on Minig Ashkenaz? Particularly his question was about the posuk, Reishis Chochma, which is said in Nusach Ashkenaz for children in the morning, and he wants to know some history, some sources for this. So I've got here 4 Sidurim. One is known as the Vilna Siddur, which has Torah Tziva, then Reishis Chochma, then Shema B'ni, and another couple of Atam Avekim. He's got a list of psukim. One of them is Reishis Chochma. Here we have another Siddur. It's actually Novominsker Siddur. He had Mudani the previous page. Reishis Chochma comes in, and then he has Baruch Shem, Torah Tziva, and Atam Avekim, and there's another non-posuk which is there, which is also in the other Siddur. And then we have here on the right of the screen, lower down, this is a Siddur from Rav Schonfeld, which does not have Reishis Chochma at all. He has the other psukim. He has Torah Tziva, Shema B'ni, Torah. It does not have the posuk Reishis Chochma. Then I have here another Siddur, which is printed in Minchas Yehuda. It's about Tov Reish Samach, something like that, Tov Reish Ayin, and it has the posuk Reishis Chochma. It doesn't have the other psukim. So what I'm seeing is that this is not a rigid minhag. It seems to be in various kehillas. Sometimes they would have these psukim, those psukim. Torah Tziva and Shema Yisrael are written in the Gemara. It says, Tinuk Mishamaskil Adaber Moch Avim Lamde Torah, my Torah Tziva, and it says Shema Yisrael, as far as I remember, Gemara Shabbos. And what I found actually whilst I was looking for this, that the Ramak, Moshe Cordovero, in the Sefer Pardes Limonim, so he has a comment on this, and he says that the father teaches his child Torah Tziva and Shema Yisrael, and these are the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit. And the child may not necessarily be in a matzav to absorb everything, but this will be drummed in the child's mind, and then later on he'll have those fundamentals of Yiddishkeit in his mind, etc. Which brings me to think about the Yud Beis Psukim. Same idea, but it's interesting. It's a Kabbalah Sefer, and he has this hesper. So the idea of having psukim, the child says psukim first thing in the morning, is Minig Yisrael, but exactly which ones? So then that seems to be a variable, and therefore if you ask a question, why Chabad don't say Reishis Chochma? Okay, it's not even in Ashkenaz, it's also not necessarily a standard minig, as you can see. Rabbi Schonfeld was obviously Nusach Ashkenaz person, he doesn't have it there. Okay, going back to our previous question, someone asked, can you reuse the tzitzis if some of them are still okay? Definitely. If you've effectively undone tzitzis from another garment, you can reuse them into it. Yeah, material tzitzis will be beged lebeged. That's the Gemara in Shabbos. I just tell you, it's actually quite tedious, because having been tied into a garment, they're very, very curly, and it's to start redoing a chutim in another garment is, as they say, it's quite a geshet. Okay, let me continue to the next point, and that is about a minhag, sorry, not minhag, the hanhoga, that if you block a doorway or a window, to leave a hole. Now, this is something which is is traced to Reb Yehuda haChosid. I'm not sure whether it's in Tzavo'oh in Sefer Chassidim. I don't remember now. I think it's in Tzavo'oh. I wrote it in Tzavo'oh. At any rate, so there's an idea of leaving a hole. Now, the story is told that in 770, upstairs in the small zal, so there's the small zal, and then there's the even smaller one. There's a cheder sheni. In between, there's a large window. And when I was actually at the time I was in 770, and there's a bocher, so they remodeled and make the hall very, very nice, and they put up a kind of a board which blocked up that window between the cheder sheni and the larger zal, and on the other side there were bookcases. And when the Rebbe saw this, he commented to Chaim Baruch Halberstam that it's we have an issue of blocking a window. Actually, those shutters, whatever, are removable, and when it would come out of Yom Kippur, the bookcases and the boards, those shutters, were taken away to be able to have Bochrim also staying in the Cheder Sheni to be able to see the Rebbe. The Rebbe would come in near the door, or back to the Baskiras. But the Rebbe told Chaim Baruch to make a small hole, just to drill a hole. But here we have a letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he says, in response to he picks up a house, you want to block up a window. So the minhag is that the window which is blocked, you leave a hole, a round hole, the size of a tefach and a half. In this hole, you'll put in a tin pipe, which is open at both ends. And when the blocking up is finished, then you can put lids on either end of this pipe, and then you can put on plaster. That's his the Frierdiker Rebbe says quite a detailed procedure of leaving such a large hole, putting in a pipe, and then putting lids on the pipe, so it remains an open tube, a hollow tube inside the wall. Apparently, this whole business of blocking windows got to do with ruchos, that they had their access, and now you block their access. But this is the advice. Now here we have something similar in a letter of the Rebbe Rashab. B'dvar HaPesach, Yadaiti Asher Azmur, the Tzemach Tzedek, that would be, said that when you block a Pesach Chaloin, to leave a cholol cotton, to leave a small opening. And he was then allowed to put inside a pipe, which was then covered with dekalach, with lids. So it seems to be almost the same thing. But what's remarkable is that the Rebbe Rashab uses the words cholol cotton, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says ketefach v'chetzi, which is not cotton at all. It's about 15 centimeters, or let's say 13 centimeters diameter. So, all right, that's what the Hayroah is. I was curious what would be the svara in such a large hole. I'm just thinking that in the concept of tumah, spreading from one room to another, if there's a mason in one room and the kohen wants to come into the other room, so if there's a window between the two rooms, if the window is open, so then the tumah can come from one to the other. And that the minimum size of such a hole, if it's a tefach al tefach. If it's less than a tefach al tefach, then the tumah doesn't spread from one room to the other. Now, a tefach al tefach, a square tefach, its diagonal is going to be 1.4, which that would be the same as the diameter, or just a little bit less than the diameter of a ketefach v'chetzi. So possibly the tefach v'chetzi round thing is you want to put in a pipe, but I don't know whether they had square pipes in the Frierdiker Rebbe's times. But tefach v'chetzi would be allowing for a tefach al tefach pesach. That's just a suggestion. Okay. Going on another couple of things. A couple of weeks ago, was it during Sukkot, we had the discussion about, is there an association between the particular Hashanahs and that day of the week of Sukkot? So one of our listeners, shared with me from Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. So he shows the following association. Hashanah L'man HaMitoch is connected with the Auspician of the day, is Avraham Avinu. He was the one who recognizes the Eibishter. And then the second one, Evan Shasio, is all about the Beis HaMikdash. Well, that's associated with Yitzchok Avinu, the Ushpizin of the second day, because the Mizbeach is one of the virtues of the Mizbeach, Mokim Hamikdash, is that that's where the ash of the Akedah is. So that's the association with Yitzchok. Oimani Choimo is extolling the virtues of Am Yisrael, Baruch HaChama, etc., etc. So then that relates to Yaakov, who's the father of Klal Yisrael in the full sense. Then Odin HaMoshiach, that's the fourth day. That's the Moshpizin of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe was the one who takes the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, and so he was the one who saw very clearly that the Eibishter is the Moshiach of the Bnei Yisrael. The next, the fifth day is Odom of Behemot, talks about Gashmistic agriculture. I called it last shiur. So this relates to Aaron. Why? Because between Moshe and Aaron, Moshe is called Shoshvina de Malka. He's like speaking on behalf of Hashem, and Aaron is Shoshvina de Matronisa. That he is on behalf of the queen, on behalf of the Tachton, he's representing their case. And so, talking about Parnosa, etc., that's something which is more Aaron's field. Sorry about the pun. And that's the fifth one. The sixth one is Adoma Me'erer, and that relates to Yosef. It talks there about Gashmistic provisions, and that relates to Yosef, who is the provider. By Chalkal Yosef, he provides Barocha, Hashpoah for the people in his generation. And finally, the seventh one, which is only said on Hoshana Rabbah, and that is corresponding to David, and he explains that. So what you're seeing here is that the Tzaddik has shown association of the seven Hoshanas to the seven Ushpizin. He's got more arichas about this, but you're welcome to look it up in the Sefer Pri Tzaddik, in this section about Sukkos. Okay, we had also ongoing. We had a discussion about teaching Hebrew, teaching a goy to read Hebrew, if you remember. And now it came to my attention that in the Stei Chemed has got a arichas gedola about this, and there Hitaka brings those who are machmir. I think we did discuss this last week. We discussed this a few weeks ago and the last week again. So my son-in-law in Chicago sent me two things. Number one, we have here a Rambam in Perek Yud of Hilchos Torah, Sefer Torah Tefillin Mezuzos, and he says the following: Kol hatmeim afilu nidos va'afilu goyim motorim leches Sefer Torah v'likros boy. Those who are impure, even a nida, a goy, avdil, are allowed to hold the Sefer Torah. They're allowed to read it, because Torah does not become tummy. Ein divrei Torah mekabelin tumah. So never noticed that diuk, but it says that mutar and likros boy, that goyim are allowed to read it. This is a mefurash Rambam, that a goy is allowed to read. So whilst there are out there, as I said in Stei Chemed, there's arichas gdola, those who are even os achas, etc. And the Rebbe often mentions this, that there's a difference between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, and that the goy is allowed to read Torah Shebechsav. And therefore my logic is, if he's allowed to read Torah Shebechsav, there's no avera to teach him how to read it. Okay. By the way, I had a shliach before Simchas Torah. He asked me, what does he do? He's got amongst his students who come, some of them are not Jewish. And they think they're Jewish, they're going to come, and he's concerned that they'll come hakofas. So I said, I call them up. Ben Sosa, what's your father's name? He says, it doesn't work that way. They're going to hold the Sefer Torah, they're going to pass it one to the other, and he's very concerned that they will be giving, that the goyim will be holding the Sefer Torah. I told him there's nothing really effectively that you can do to stop it, and it's nicht so gefährlich. So now afterwards I see this Rambam, it's nicht so gefährlich. Yeah, it's not something which we choose to do, but if it happens, don't lose sleep over it. Then the second thing, he has got a sicha from Tovshin Chof Vov. This is the second year of Rashi sichas, and the Rebbe is talking on Bereshis. He's talking about the first Rashi, where Rashi says, why does the Torah start from Bereshis? Koich Masiv Higid Liyamoy, that the goyim will come and say that you are robbers, you've taken away our land. So the Eibishter says in the Torah, Hashem created it, gave it to them, gave it to us, etc. That's the Rashi. And the Rebbe says, why does it have to be in Chumash? Why do you have to do Tosha B'Chsav? And Chayre, he asks, Monofshach, if the Goyim will deny, what's the difference? They can deny Tosha B'Chsav also. And if they are going to accept, so it can be Tosha B'Al Peh also. Why does it have to be in Tosha B'Chsav? In other words, I think this is going back to the question, why does the Torah have to give the whole history of creation? Could have started from HaChedesh HaZelachem. The history, okay, can be in Tosha B'Al Peh. And on this, the Rebbe answers, that you want the Goyim to be able to read it. And you're not allowed to teach in Tosha B'Al Peh. Therefore, if it was in Tosha B'Al Peh, they could say, and the Goyim are coming with their complaints, you can't prove them otherwise because you can't teach them Tosha B'Al Peh. Even Tosha B'Chsav, since it is accessible for them, and it's shaykh to the Shivim Umos, and we know that Moshe Rabbeinu translates the Torah to Shivim Loshen Bar Heitev because of the Shivim Umos, and therefore, it says if a guy learns Torah is Chayv Misa, that's Tosha B'Al Peh, because for Tosha B'Al Peh they are considered a zar, and they have no business dealing with it, but for Tosha B'Chsav they are allowed to. So, despite the Machlokes HaPoskim, there seems to be in several sichos that Rebbe takes this balance that Tosha B'Chsav is accessible for Bnei Noach. One more thing on our list, and then we'll see if we have any time for anything else, and that is, I shared with you a couple of weeks ago a Maimer, and where the Rebbe had asked the question, where the Rambam in Hilchas Lulav says about the Simchas Beis HaShe'evo, he brings the posuk Usmachtim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem Shivas Yomim. And the Rebbe seems to be asking that from the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, etc., to ask Kohanim that Usmachtim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem means to rejoice with the Lulav. Again, and it says, Usmachtim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem means you should rejoice with the Lulav. So how can the Rambam use this posuk Usmachtim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem for Simchas Beis Hashem? But that was the question which the Rebbe is raising, and I just want to share with you a possible teretz. And this is from the Sefer Yad Malachi. Yad Malachi is a Sefer of Klolei HaTalmud, Klolei HaPoskim, and he brings here, from the Lechem Mishneh, it doesn't matter, Darka Shel HaRambam, Likach HaDrosha HaYosef Pshuta, Afal Gavdi is Dachya B'Gemara. It's the style of the Rambam that he will bring the extrapolation, the posuk, which is more obvious, even though in Gemara this has been rejected as being the strict source of this halacha, and still the Rambam will bring it. And sometimes he'll bring a posuk which is not mentioned in Gemara altogether, because that communicates the message clearer. And therefore, coming back to our question, why does the Rambam bring the posuk Osmachtim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem, which in the Gemara says that refers to particularly with the Arba Minim and the Beis Hamikdash, but it certainly Kepshutoi is supporting the union of celebrating Simchas Beis HaShe'evo, and therefore that's why the Rambam chooses it, even though not like Halocha, that's not the actual source. Just another couple of minutes. So someone asked me Erev Shabbos about making shechiyanu on cooked esrog. She took an esrog just from now, and she can make a shechiyanu. So generally, I mean, I was not so sure about it, and I saw there's a Sefer Shari HaBrocha all about brochas. So quickly I looked up, and he says not to say a brocha on the esrog. My hesitation was a cooked fruit. How do you know it's from this year? Perhaps it's from last year. It's also, he says there, that since esrogim can last a long time on the tree, therefore, who says it's from this year's harvest? Who says it's from this year? Could be from last year. That's one of the svaras. The poil, he says that you shouldn't say shechiyanu on a cooked esrog. Another question which came my way was, can I wear a woolen garment, let's say a woolen, if I'm wearing a linen shirt, would I be allowed to wear a woolen jumper on top of it? Is that a question of shatnez? So the answer is that is before Shulchan Aruch you are allowed to, and the reason being, listen carefully, that it's possible, although awkward, it's possible to remove the linen without removing the wool. But let's say if you have two socks, one on top of the other, to wear a linen sock and to wear a woolen sock on top of one or the other, that wouldn't be okay, because you cannot remove the inner one without removing the outer one. So there Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't do that. But when it's two garments which you could remove the lower without removing the upper, then Shulchan Aruch says it's in Shin Aleph, sorry, in Yedidei it says it's okay. And one last thing which I'm going to share with you is, someone asked me about having a dustbin or American garbage can in a sukkah. Now, this is relevant particularly in communal sukkahs, and if there's no bin available, so then that's inviting that there's going to be more mess left around in the sukkah. So, is it appropriate to have a bin in the sukkah? Now, I think we once discussed, I remember looking into it, about having a bin in a shul. Is it respectful to have a bin in a shul or not? Now, the reality is, in Shtibelach, where people have coffee with the disposable cups, etc., and tissues, etc., if there wouldn't be a bin in the shul, it would be a bigger disgrace. It doesn't have to be next to the bimah. It can be in a discreet place. But I think that actually lends to the covet of the place. So, coming back to do you have a bin in your living room? Probably not. But in a communal place, so is it appropriate to have a bin in the sukkah? Well, if it can be just outside the sukkah, that would be preferable. Depending on the circumstances. The person who wrote to me this question, he said they kind of came up with an idea that somewhere in the sukkah there's some niche which is under some kind of balcony or something, which is Adayfan Akuma kind of stuff. So it's in the sukkah, but not in the sukkah. So they put the bin over there, and so in that way everyone's happy. It's not it's a serious shiur, because the Mr. Brewer brings, I think, Tofresh Lamed Tes, there is a svara. There's one of the Rabbeinu Noach and others, Rishonim, who hold, you're not meant to have dirty dishes in the sukkah. You're not meant to have dirty pots in the sukkah. There are those who say that if the dirty dishes are in the sukkah, the dirty pots in the sukkah, you cannot make a bracha on the sukkah, because of the presence of of something offensive to the sukkah. The Pearl Mr. Brewer says you can, but it does raise a question, yeah, and therefore having this eitzah, putting it in a way that it's not mamish in the sukkah, would be okay. Okay, that's what I have to share with you for tonight. I wish you a good Tzavo'oh, and Zayin Chodesh zal zijn gebenched met de Geula, Mashiach Tzidkeinu, Meher Yameinu Mamish.
Good.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Bye.
Good luck.